I will begin by saying that I absolutely denounce totalitarian and brutal dictatorships, because the issue is we feel that repercussions from those dictatorships, that authoritarianism, not just in the international market, but also in the United States in many difficult ways. So I denounce all of that. We stand against that. We stand against authoritarianism. We stand against Putin, usually, universally. But that's kind of not really what this bill is doing here. It is, I will say, taking up a lot of space and raising questions about what just do you mean when you say we oppose socialism in all its forms in a adopting resolution, when, you know, we heard one version here today that said it's when the budget gets too big. So what does that mean when the budget gets too big? I supported what we did in the American Rescue Plan because we needed it, because our country was going off of an economic cliff. And if we hadn't stepped in, we don't know the problem that we would have had to climb out of. So I'm really proud to have spent my first year here voting for the American Rescue Plan and voting for those budgets that were larger. And I'm really excited about today, right, that some would, I've heard some on the other side of the aisle, and presidents, as our ranking member pointed out, say that Social Security or Medicare and Medicaid are socialism. Well, guess what? Today is the anniversary, the 83rd year anniversary of the first Social Security check going out. And what we should be doing is singing it, happy birthday to Social Security, because so many of my constituents, when I go around to my district, as we just heard from the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, I don't hear about this. What I hear is they want to make sure that their Social Security checks are going to continue to flow to their mailboxes without cuts, without privatization, without any of the attacks that we're hearing from the other side. So that's why having the ability to amend this resolution to make it very clear what it is intended to do, which we all agree that we all denounce totalitarian, authoritarian, and socialism in terms of what that looks like in North Korea, in those places in the Americas that are suffering, that are dear to my heart. We know that, but what does that clause mean? So that's why it is problemsome that we don't have the ability to amend, which I understand we might try to, but we'll see what we get to. And Chairman McHenry, I need to tell you that this is sort of my first week on rules, so they told me I had to come, so I showed up. But I love hearing you talk about what you want to do. I've spent my life before getting to Congress taking capital to places where it wasn't before, because small places can do big things, but not if they don't have the capital. And so I spent, I got about $1 billion of capital in places that no one would have expected that it could go and should go. And that's a lot for a little state like New Mexico. So thank you for that. But those are the things we need to be talking about. Because when I'm out in my district, my ranchers and farmers, they want to know, what are we going to do so there aren't monopolies about the number of meat plants, so that they can sell their cattle for what it's worth when they are having a hard time making a profit and those concentrated businesses are making record profits. Well, they raise the cattle and suffer through the droughts. So those are the things that I think we should be spending our time on, rather than agreeing that we all do, that those authoritarian dictatorships and socialistic dictatorships are bad. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this resolution. We're supporting the bedrock of this country, the foundation of America, capitalism. Socialism is directly opposite from that. And we are creeping at a fast rate towards socialism, and particularly with this administration. Now, Ms. Waters, I like you. You and I are good friends. You're real easy to call your fellow members of Congress terrorists, extremists, but when Guy Rushenthal's asked you to denounce Putin, Stalin, Xi Jinping, you wouldn't do it. You get back to Trump, and I get that. But these are countries that this administration is supporting. And let me give you some examples. Patrick, you're chairman of the financial, basically anything that goes through this Congress with the financial committee. Dollars mean something, don't they? What does it mean to this country when $80 billion was left in Afghanistan? Trucks, armory. That's money, isn't it? Why did this administration take that path? That's got to be answered. Russia was brought up. Why was the Nord Stream pipeline opened back up under this administration, under a dictatorship with Russia? Why was American oil cut off from the American citizens? And why does this administration like the dictator countries to purchase our oil? 5 countries have 40% of the production in this world, U.S. being one of them, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Why does this administration choose to have them make profits on the backs of the American people? Somebody needs to explain that. You say we're not inching toward socialism? The facts prove otherwise with this administration. And Mr. Trump, you keep mentioning Ms. Waters. I'm glad you mentioned him. He stopped all this. He stopped the slide toward socialism. He opened up American energy production. He opened up the free enterprise. We had the biggest boom in the history of this country. And the fact that just these 3, we've had the biggest, as Thomas mentioned, we've had the biggest expansion of government in my lifetime. That's why we've got to remind people in this resolution that socialism has to be denounced. The actions of this administration prove otherwise. The actions of what they are putting our dollars to. It is a insult to the American people to say anything otherwise. So, Mr. McKinney, you want to comment on any of the?
I think you said it well enough. Look, discretionary spending is dramatically up from pre-COVID levels. That will be highlighted in our budget resolution. That's the hope among House Republicans. Our hope is that we can get a spending agreement with the administration. And since the debt ceiling was mentioned, this president has said something that no president said in the last 40 years. We're not going to negotiate around a debt ceiling. He needs to be reminded that he led the negotiations as vice president for President Obama around a debt ceiling agreement in 2011. So we certainly will raise the debt ceiling, but in connection with a fiscal agreement with the administration, with the Senate. That's the outcome, I think, is rational and commensurate with a Democrat Congress with a Republican president and a Republican Congress with a Democrat president and every different version of it. But the fundamentals of our economy, the American people understand what inflation is anew. They haven't experienced inflation that we're currently facing in 40 years, and they don't like it. And they want to know why. Well, it's because the last Congress, actually the last 2 Congresses, spent more money in peacetime than any previous Congress. So our fiscal house matters in connection with our economic prosperity. Our governmental policies matter in context to our prosperity as well. And frankly, I think we need to have a healthy debate between Democrats and Republicans about these bigger things. And then certainly the contours of policy underlying that. And we need to agree where we can and move public policy forward. And in divided government, I think we can get those agreements so we can improve our economy and make us more resilient and more competitive internationally against our main competitor and foe globally in China. But we're debating a resolution that has the opening clause and the closing clause of things that I think are pretty simple and straightforward. Whereas socialist ideologies necessitate a concentration of power that has time and time again collapsed into communism, communist regimes, totalitarian rule, and brutal dictatorships, right? And then the resolved that Congress denounces socialism in all its forms and opposes the implementation of socialist policies in the United States of America. That's, what the author, Ms. Salazar, wrote. We can all nuance this stuff in our own words and what we'd like, but that's the resolution before us, and I think it's something we should endorse.
It's pretty simple, and I think we can have bipartisan support. I look for every Democrat to vote for this. If they believe it, I think they need to vote for condemning socialism and giving all the accolades to what's made this country great is capitalism. And that has not been the course of action that I can remember from this administration. And if there's ever anything that's at the top of the forefront, it's the slide into government-controlled socialism, which we have to.
Would the gentleman yield for?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and Ms. Waters said she's a capitalist. I'm wondering, is it intentional that the word capitalism is not in this resolution at all? And is anyone could explain why Putin is not mentioned as one of the bad leaders that should be condemned? I mean, we're talking about capitalism here, but it's not mentioned at all in this resolution. And Putin is not mentioned either. I'm just wondering if there's a reason why.
Socialism is.
No, why wasn't capitalism mentioned? That was my question.
Well, you could list, I don't know how many different items if you want to break it down. Socialism covers the very thing that we're against. It covers all the problems that if we slide into, I mean, you could put capitalism in it, but we don't need to do that. We're condemning, we're condemning socialism, which your party ought to be easily for.
But why wasn't Putin mentioned as somebody that we should condemn?
Why should he be in there? You're going to list?
You asked Ranking Member Waters to condemn Putin, and I think Putin should. I know I condemn Putin. I think he's a thug.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Mr. McGovern.
You brought Putin up. That's
well, Guy just asked if she would condemn him, and she wouldn't do it. Let me ask this: if we include,
but why isn't? I'm just asking, why isn't Putin in this resolution as the people that we should denounce?
All right, let me ask you this:
and why are we not supporting capitalism?
Let me ask you this.
I don't know. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's not.
I'm reclaiming my time,
Okay.
Mr. McGovern. Let me ask you this: if we put capitalism in there, and if we put the different dictators, would you support this resolution?
I think I would want a little bit more, like a clarification of what policies are you getting at?
Okay. What would it take for you to vote for this resolution?
Well, I mean, I think I would like to have in here a clear understanding that Social Security and Medicare are off the
That's
table.
a political statement that that's fine. This has nothing
I don't know.
to do
That's
with
what I'm worried
socialism.
about. That's what I'm worried
That
about.
has nothing to do with socialism.
That's the whole point of our concern.
Reclaiming my time. I support this amendment. This is a very simple amendment that should get no kickback from either party. This is very simple, and this country is what's made us great, as we've talked about. So support it, and I hope it moves forward. I yield back.
Before I move to our next, I would just advise all the members, please don't speak over one another.
New Mexico, Ms. Leger Fernandez.
The gentlewoman from New Mexico has been recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I absolutely denounce the brutal and communist regimes of Castro, Maduro, Stalin, and other dictators in the whereas clauses of this resolution. But sadly, instead of spending our precious moments in the people's house, expanding opportunity for hardworking Americans, supporting ranchers, farmers, and rural communities, lowering health care costs, and strengthening Social Security and Medicare, we are spending hours, actually days, in pure political theater. In the Rules Committee, when I offered Mr. Takano's amendment to clarify that this resolution does not also condemn Social Security, Medicare, and veterans' health benefits, Republicans blocked it. Yet I know still that our love and respect for our veterans, seniors, and retirees will always guide our work to ensure they receive all the benefits they've earned. I will not stray from our obligation to create prosperity, hope, and a future everywhere in America. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from California reserves. And
the gentleman from South Carolina reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield now 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Teresa Leger Fernandez.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to oppose the Polluters Over People Act and the mining provisions that will make it easier for foreign-owned companies to pollute our lands and waters and destroy our tribal cultural resources. America's 150-year-old mining law already fails to protect our communities from irresponsible mining. We see that in the thousands of abandoned mines that dot New Mexico and the West. H.R. 1 would only make it worse, threatening our water, and as we know, agua es vida, water is life. I am disappointed that the Republicans blocked my amendment to stop mining exploration on public lands if it harms our water, farmers, and tribal communities. Do they not care about our most essential resource, our water? And indeed, some proposed mining projects are from subsidiaries of foreign companies, like Resolution Copper in Arizona, which has ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Why are they protecting the Chinese Communist Party's subsidiary mining our precious resources? That mine would devastate tribal cultural resources and threaten our precious water resources. So I urge my colleagues to oppose this Polluter Over People Act. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman from New Jersey. All right. He reserves. The gentleman from South Carolina.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think that the sadness that Representative Fishback brought up with regards to the deputy who lost his life, and I've spent quite a bit of time while I was home with police officers and first responders. I'd like to also point out, though, that last year, in the fiscal year 23 appropriations, Democrats supported and passed a bill that had significant resources targeted to law enforcement. We did $4.4 billion, an increase of $506 million for law enforcement. That included everything from community-oriented policing to second chance programs, money to address sexual assault kills, since those were not being dealt. In that bill, 216 Democrats supported it, and almost every Republican opposed supporting additional funding for law enforcement. That's what it means to support law enforcement, is to actually give them the funding and the support that they need to do their job. What this bill does, though, is take away the ability of a local jurisdiction to decide for itself what it needs to do. And it is once again, as you pointed out, Ranking Member, another kind of waste of time when there is so much more that our constituents want us to do. Thank you for raising the issues with regards to gun violence. As we were discussing the fact that we are not addressing gun violence, a statistic that makes my heart cry is that right now, for every kindergarten child that is in school right now, if you go to their classroom, one of them will not live to adulthood. I've been in those classrooms where, because we fail to address the scourge of gun violence and the fact that it is the greatest killer of all children, that I have walked into those classrooms. Which child is not going to make it? Because we failed to address gun violence. That's what's important to do, not interfere with local governments. Chair Comer, thank you very much for when you were here last, for our discussion with regards to local control. And as you know, I am, I hold Kentucky now very close to my heart, and I'm so sad of what happened there. I'm so sad because it just reverberates through that community. But I do want, Chairman Comer, and this is a bad time to put you on the spot, but you did recognize that local control is best, that you would not want Congress to be talking about what is best in any of your Kentucky towns, right? That those need to make those decisions themselves. Would you still agree to that local control of these issues?
I agree, local control is best, but we have a constitutional obligation to oversee and be the check and balance for the District of Columbia, and we have a crime problem here. We have our police officers begging us for help, and look, the arguments that have been made that this bill isn't going to go anywhere, the president's going to veto it, with all due respect, the president said that on the last disapproval of resolution. And 31 Democrats supported it on the floor in the House and 31 Democrats in the Senate. So, and then Joe Biden signed it. And I feel that this could be deja vu all over again. We have a crime crisis in America. We have people on the other side of the aisle that are all over the board on funding or defunding the police. At the end of the day, this is something our police are begging for. And look, I'm all about holding people accountable. And 100% of the resolution wasn't bad, but the overwhelming majority of it was bad. I want to hold bad government employees accountable. We argue all the time in the Oversight Committee. I feel like Mr. Connolly, Mr. Ashton spend a lot of their time defending poor performers in the federal workforce. So I'm all about terminating poor performers. But at the end of the day, the bad in this bill significantly outweighs the good. And I think that, with respect to wasting time, one of the biggest issues in America, it's a bipartisan issue, is crime. And this is the poster child for crime in Washington, D.C. We can do something about it. And HJ Resolution 42 is a step in the right direction.
I will yield to.
Just for the record, in the last SAP, the president did not say he would veto the bill.
I'm sorry?
The president did not say he would veto the bill in the previous example.
I thought he was whipped. Yeah. It was my understanding that he said he was opposed to the bill.
Yeah,
I think we said that in the Rules Committee. I think you said that in the Rules
He did not say he would veto it.
But he signed it.
So
Okay.
for the record,
difference.
we
Oh,
did
okay.
receive.
All right.
we
For
did
the sake of accuracy.
Okay.
So for the record, we did receive a veto, and Ranking Member Raskin, would you like to address?
Thank you, Ms. Leger.
That's what he said the last time, too, though.
No, he didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I must have misunderstood.
No, thank you for that correction, because I know he never said he was going to veto it, but he has said repeatedly he will veto this legislation. But, so my good friend from Kentucky invoked the specter of defund the police. I've never heard a member of our committee, this committee, any committee, talk about defunding the police, although we have a number of members of the committee on Chairman Comer's side who now talk openly about defunding the FBI and defunding the ATF. And that's not a position.
Defunding certain people at the top, fat cats at the top that aren't complying with the Constitution, that are weaponizing the federal government.
Well, are you agreeing
just
with
one
defund?
or two bad apples,
I
holding
never-
bad apples accountable?
Yeah, I never quite heard that reservation or caveat to it. They are saying it's time to defund the FBI and defund the ATF. So if you're interested in defunding any law enforcement units, including America's national law enforcement agency in the FBI, it's the other party you'll be looking to. Don't come to the Democratic Party, because nobody's interested in that.
Right, and that's what the appropriations bills are about. We have actually supported funding the police. We have increased the funding for the police, and that is where it is. The budget reflects your values, and we funded the police. So I'm going to go ahead and move on because we want to get down to vote, but I'd also point out that many of the pieces that we see in this DC law are actually enacted in many jurisdictions, such as prohibiting the use of neck restraints, which Texas provides. So there are numerous aspects of this which are consistent with jurisdictions both where Republicans lead and Democrats lead. And with that, I will yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Chair thanks the gentlelady. Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
For the sake of time, I'm so tired of hearing anti-police rhetoric. A guy just gave me a list. I'm not going to recite the names. Y'all are taking the support for the criminal rather than the police officer. And I just, and to keep saying gun violence is like saying airplane violence that crashed into 9/11. It's people that fire, it's mentally ill people that fire the guns, not gun violence. Guns don't jump up and all of a sudden shoot people. Jamie, I appreciate y'all, this rule. I think it's a good one, and for the sake of time, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman and recognizes the gentlelady from Indiana.
Thank you. You know, we all did spend those 2 weeks at home. I spent a little longer because of my surgery, but I was still in contact with so many teachers and students and parents across my vast district. And we know that children in New Mexico and across this nation face so many unique and heartbreaking challenges. So when we walk through these amazing halls that we get to work in with the responsibility we have to keep all of our constituents safe, I am looking for those solutions to the problems we actually face. Chairwoman Fox, what is the leading cause of death for children under 18 in the United States?
Well, I've heard it said here today that it is gun violence.
Yes, indeed. Gun violence is the greatest cause of death for children under 18. More children die of gun violence than any other cause. And that to me is among the most urgent issues when it comes to making sure our kids are safe and cared for in our schools. Indeed, you know, since Columbine, 349,000 children have suffered through gun violence in the schools, because it's not just the ones who die, it's not just the ones that have been shot and are recovering in a hospital, it's all of those who had to suffer through. If you have not read the stories of the young boy who played he was dead in Uvalde, if you have not heard those stories and recognized that something needs to be done, Chairwoman Fox, I think the one too many, you pointed out that one too many is too much. To me, 349,000 are too many. There were 46 school shootings last year, and those numbers are only rising. Chairwoman Fox, does this bill do anything to address the scourge of gun violence in our schools?
The intent of this bill has nothing to do with gun violence. It's all about treating women fairly.
Thank you. I would indeed say that last year, we passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That law helps provide resources to fight the mental health crisis amongst our youth. It was pointed to in several of my visits to the schools because it was going to attack a major issue facing our children. That law is an example of how Democrats and Republicans can work together with President Biden to actually help our kids. I really want to thank our Chairman Cole for having supported that bipartisan law. Representative Takano, thank you so much, Chairman Takano, for reading that passage of the governor. The idea that his goal, not understanding, in some ways maybe similar to Chairwoman Fox, as to what is really about with a transgender child. That was so moving, the fact that that governor just wanted to make sure that the children in his state stayed alive. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact that a law like this and other laws that are targeted, that are using trans children and trans people as targets in order to get people mad, in order to get people to pay money, to send in money to political campaigns? Tell us a little bit about what happens to the actual children when they see this kind of attack on who they are.
Well, there is, I think, obviously not among all Republicans, because the governor of Idaho is a Republican, the governor of Indiana is a Republican. So not all Republicans are engaging in extreme efforts, extremist efforts to target trans kids, to up in public education. But there has been political success in some parts of our country where some other governors, notably Governor DeSantis of Florida, has seen a political advantage in using and riding the wave of misunderstanding, of creating more fear among parents. Parents care a lot about their kids. We all know parents care about their kids. And it's not too hard with a person who sits in a place of leadership to manipulate those fears, to fan those fears, to the detriment of a very, very vulnerable population that's not understood. And even my colleague, the chairwoman, claims not to even grant that trans people and trans young people exist. Simply don't exist. And therefore, it makes it easy for them to write a piece of legislation and have it purport to be about protecting girls and women. This bill does not protect girls and women. It does not increase opportunities for women to compete at the collegiate level or to win more scholarships, for women and girls to have equal playing fields, to have access to facilities and practice fields that are on par with what men have and what boys have, to have the same, to have parity in the kinds of sports teams, to have a girls and a sports team, girls and boys sports team. This bill does nothing to ameliorate the fact that, according to the Women's Sports Foundation, men and boys still have 1 million more opportunities than girls do. And I haven't seen the chairwoman or any Republican advance such legislation. Why are they saying that this bill achieves that purpose when its main purpose is to target a group of people that they don't even say exists? So that's an issue. So sports bans don't just negatively impact transgender and intersex athletes being targeted, but also the mental health of transgender and other LGBTQI youth more broadly. 85% of transgender and non-binary youth say that recent debates around anti-trans bills have negatively impacted their mental health. And Congresswoman, let me just say, I remember being a teenager in California when a state senator named John Briggs qualified for the ballot an initiative known as the Briggs Initiative, which would have banned gay teachers or LGBT teachers from teaching in the schools. That debate affected me as somebody growing up, as someone being a teenager. And so I can completely understand how just this debate about transgender youth and sports, transgender book banning, banning books that even mention them. I mean, this movement, this extremist movement, doesn't even want kids to have access to books that tell them, that reveal their experience, the experience of who they are. It's not about converting them. It's not about making more trans kids or grooming them. It's about just having kids know that there's somebody who understands their experience. This debate, the kind of divisive debate we're having, is affecting the mental health of transgender kids and other LGBTQI youth.
Thank you very much. And, I've read reports that show that 29% of transgender youth have actually been threatened or injured with a weapon or on school property, compared to, 7%. Any bullying is wrong. But to see that multifold increase on transgender kids is really scary. And this kind of bill just gives more to that, especially if you have some of the intrusive needs to verify somebody's gender, right? And that's what you were talking about that we need to be worried about. One of the things that I think is very concerning, I don't know if you did read the recent article that came out in the New York Times of how a campaign against transgender rights mobilized conservatives. And that article, actually, they poll tested what would get people the most upset as some of the issues around equality seem to fade. Because now I think there is a general acceptance among many that you can get married, that we can have LGBTQ marriage equality, right? So that I think is, did you read that article?
I actually did read that article, and one of the things the article, one of the ideas that it put forward was the idea that America the American people have generally moved on about gay, lesbian, and bisexual people, that there's been a greater acceptance, and that the so-called culture war over lesbian, gays, and bisexual people has generally been lost by the conservative right. I would say I know a lot of conservatives who embrace LGBT. I mean, it's not a liberal or conservative thing, but there is an extremist element of our country that is looking to capitalize politically to gain power based on America's, I think, less familiarity, the Americans' relatively less familiarization of trans people. I think over time, Americans are going to come to understand transgenderism, and they're people who have put forward bills like this either will be ashamed or history will look very unkindly on this very ugly episode in our history.
Right, same as LGBTQ. These are children who are children. There are children, there are our cousins, there are brothers. They are part of who we are. We cannot deny them as they are. We cannot deny their existence and their ability to be able to play sports, to be able to, I mean, I read one of the articles in fact, I think I was involved in the Supreme Court case, in the case where it's like, that child was actually very bad at sports, but it was somewhere where she was able to participate with her friends and participate in those school activities. Chairman Cole, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the April 16, 2023 New York Times article, How a Campaign Against Transgender Rights Mobilized Conservatives.
Without objection.
And I think the other point that you were making, Representative Takano, was with regards to who is mad about this. And that I have looked at the writings and the statements of women's organizations, women in sports organizations. There is a long list of women who are in sports who oppose this law. Chairman Cole, I would like to seek unanimous consent to enter into the record statement of women's rights and gender justice organizations in support of full and equal access to participation in athletics for transgender people.
Without objection.
So can you speak a little bit more on where the position is of women in sports on this issue?
Well, there are notable sports figures who have taken, I think, a position of fear. And there are a great many more women, accomplished sports figures, who are very supportive of transgender women and girls participating in sports. It should be pointed out at the elite level, at the Olympic level and intercollegiate sports level, transgender women have been welcomed into competition. This bill, the proponents of this bill, are seeking to use one very notable instance of controversy to ban participation of all trans students across the country. And the ironic thing, the moral panic, the panic of unfairness that's been created by that one instance at the intercollegiate level in swimming, this bill would do nothing to address. This bill would use the federal leverage of denial of funding to insist that schools ban all transgender students from participating. That is the egregious thing of this bill.
Thank you. And Chairwoman Fox, thank you very much for your support of Title IX. I think I kind of missed Title IX. It didn't make it to my little town in northern New Mexico. They took a while to get on, so I didn't, it wasn't until I could play softball here with the Congressional Women's Softball Club that I was able to pick up a bat and catch a ball. But we heard about the fact that there are such inequities. Representative Takano went through them. Does this bill actually address any of those inequities, like resource facility, equipment inequities, budget cuts, any of those? Does this bill do anything about that?
As I mentioned earlier, Title IX has been in existence for 50 years as of last year, And so my belief is that where there were dramatic inequities, that those have been taken care of. Otherwise, people would have been filing lawsuits under Title IX and seeking redress. I just want to say this bill doesn't deny anyone an opportunity to participate in sports. In fact, it protects the equal opportunity of girls and women to participate in athletics. So this supports Title IX.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
This supports Title IX.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so I think there is still, and part of what has been entered into the record talks about the inequities. So Title IX isn't quite perfect yet, and yes, there have been efforts to increase it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for questions.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Chair Cole, for giving me the opportunity. And before I get into questioning, I wondered if Ranking Member Nadler might want to respond to some of those questions that we were just hearing.
Well, thank you very much. I just want to make one point. Title V of this bill will result in long-term detention of children. This title eliminates the current requirement that DHS transfer children within 72 hours to HHS custody. During the border surge of 2018 under the Trump administration, we saw horrible images of many children held in CPB custody in crowded and often squalid conditions for lengthy periods of time. If this bill is implemented, if Title V of this bill is implemented, the lengthy detention of children in such hard conditions would become standard operating procedure. I thank the gentlelady.
Will the gentlelady yield for a response?
Actually, I want to respond to that first. And I think that I've been at the border following under the Biden administration, and I saw the way in which our Custom Patrol officers were working really hard to make sure that those children were processed as quickly as possible. They were moving them into nonprofits where they were being well cared for. And the problem is one of funding. There had been supplemental funding to provide for this, and we need to continue to provide for that supplemental funding. And what we have to do is fix the broken immigration system. And I think that's what we all agree on, but we should not fix it on top of the backs of these poor children. And as I was there at the border, and you might appreciate this, Representative Burgess, as I was there at the border, I recalled another story of a refugee, another story of somebody, of a mother who was going to send her child to a place that she believed he would be safe because she knew that where she lived, he would not be safe. And so that mother gathered her baby and she put him in a small raft and put him on the Nile River and sent him downstream. Because if she would have kept him at home, she knew he would die. That baby was welcomed. That baby was Moses. And I call upon us here, I call upon my Republicans to think about the story of Moses and imagine what it must be like to be a parent who sends her child north through the Darien Gap, through all of these tragic circumstances, because they want their children to live. They want their children to live. Earlier, we heard from Representative Joaquin that was what was written on the application for his grandmother, that grandmother was sent here in order to live. And I think that is a really key thing of what we must do. Now, I want to address the issue that Dr. Burgess did raise with regards to the debt ceiling, because it strikes me that comprehensive immigration reform, something like the U.S. Citizenship Act, would spur economic growth. Indeed, the last time Congress seriously considered comprehensive immigration reform in 2013, the CBO estimated it would increase gross domestic product by $1.4 trillion. So if we're serious about addressing economic issues in our fiscal house, we would actually pass comprehensive immigration reform, the kind of reform that would make it possible for those who are now here working, those who are now here starting businesses but without papers, that they would then be able to contribute to our economy. I actually am old enough to have participated in the Immigration Reform and Control Act as an attorney helping those who were going to gain lawful status through the IRCA. What we saw was a boost in economic activity from that, a significant boost. But let's talk about bills that we've actually put forth and where do we get that support from. When I'm in New Mexico, I let everybody know, I have a rural district, so I'm talking to my farmers, I'm talking to my home builders, and what I hear them say over and over again is they want us to pass immigration reform that addresses their need for workers, that addresses their need for workers on the ranches, the farmers, that allows dreamers to stay in the U.S. I'm going to ask each of the chairs, yes or no. Does this bill that we're presently put before us, does it address the need for additional workers that we have in our society? Perhaps I'll start with you.
This is a border security bill, not an immigration bill, as I understand it. Once we get border security, we can fix the immigration. The problem is it has been exemplified by this administration's unsecuring the border. It creates an incentive that drives more and more folks into the country. If you fix the immigration system and provide with an unsecured border, it's just even more. So that's why our argument, I think Mr. Burgess was, or Congressman Burgess was making this point earlier, let's get border security and then let's talk about immigration reform. But this bill, by its title and I think by its context.
Thank you so very much, Chairman, because I think that really is a difference of opinion. That I think that what we're looking at is that we can do both, that we should do both, because in order to do comprehensive, you need to address both. And you need to address those things that are most impactful to our issues, which I'll get to in a bit. By the way, did you vote for the Bipartisan Farm Workforce Modernization Act last cycle?
I'd have to go look. I don't remember.
Let me tell you, that Bipartisan Farm Worker Modernization Act, that was one of those pieces of legislation that was worked out by those most impacted, right? It was worked on by the United Farm Workers, and they came to the table and they told us, you know what, it doesn't have everything we want, but it has what we need. It was worked on by those whose businesses depend on those workers. So it was both business was at the table, farm workers were at the table. We had a bill. It was bipartisan. Mr. Chair, I don't believe you did vote. You did not vote for it.
Probably did.
And actually, Chair McCall, do you recall if you voted for it?
I don't believe I did.
I don't think you did. And Chair Jordan, I know you didn't vote for it either. But those are
I'm sure there was some reason in there.
Right. But those are the kinds of things that if we did that, right, that is bipartisan, we would start addressing so many of the issues we have, especially in rural areas like mine. And I'm looking over at our ranking member, Thompson. You and I often talk about the issues that we need addressed in rural areas. You and I, we represent big rural areas. Tell me, how does what we're looking at now impact your rural communities?
Well, thank you very much. I have a large agricultural district that depends significantly on the migrant labor force to harvest our crops. Without it, those crops could not be harvested, to be honest with you, whether the individuals are coming from the southern border or from the northern border or wherever. In addition to that, our challenge is we have a value system as Americans that we have to uphold. The Homeland Security part of this bill would say that those NGOs that were talked about earlier, that if one person they helped turn out to be illegal, they could get no additional DHS funds. And if in my situation, I have a working disaster in my district right now, if the Red Cross or another NGO are trying to help people, with lodging or whatever, if they are cited, then they lose all the funding associated with DHS. So we put a lot of people out of work. There are some other issues associated with it, and I know there are some challenges that we have to look at, but those NGOs play a significant part in addressing a lot of issues along the southern border, and for us to try to punish them for their humanitarian efforts would not be good.
We often refer to those NGOs and to the many volunteers who work with them who have huge hearts. Imagine the compassion that these organizations have. Thank you, Chairman Jordan, for nodding, because you know what these NGOs are facing, and you know they have big hearts, right? But they have a lot of volunteers, and they are there to help out. I would just note that if you looked at the manner in which the Democrats in Congress voted for and passed numerous bills last cycle that increased funding for police, I was very appreciative of the ones that increased funding for smaller police officers, since I come from a rural area and we have smaller police forces because we have a lot of small police forces in New Mexico. I was very appreciative of the increased funding we had to assist police in many, many ways through the Department of Justice. And one of the concerns I have is that this resolution, Congressional Resolution 40, it does leave out some important things. It leaves out state police. I just talked about a horrible event in my district. The response to that shooting was made by the Farmington Police, which is a local law enforcement. It also have a state police. We have a local law enforcement, Farmington officer, and a state police officer, both at the hospital. It leaves out tribal police. It leaves out all of the different federal police that work in New Mexico. And I would say that what we need is to have all law enforcement always working together. And so we must and should praise all of them, and we should encourage both more funding and more cooperation, collaboration, because it is through that cooperation, collaboration, through honoring their hard work, because my state police, they are amazing. I meet with them on a regular basis. They deserve the recognition. They deserve the funding that we have always, and under Democrats, have always provided, because it is the funding that we have done that we should be judged on, of what are we doing, and we have funded the police. Ranking Member Nadler, would you like to address some of the concerns that have been raised?
Yes, I would, and thank you for asking. We've heard a lot about the Democrats defunding the police and so forth. Facts belie that. Large cities with Democratic mayors spend far more money on policing and hire far more police officers than large cities with Republican mayors. The 25 largest Democratic-run cities employ 75% more police officers than the 25 largest Republican-run cities on a per capita basis. The 25 largest Democratic-run cities spend 38% more on policing than the 25 largest Republican-run cities, again, on a per capita basis. In the most recent budget cycle, the 25 largest Democratic-run cities collectively increased their police budgets more than the 25 largest Republican-run cities, albeit by a modest 4.34% versus 4.11%. Republicans talk more about funding the police than they do actually funding the police. And that's why, for example, while the South Carolina murder rate increased 22% from 2019 to 2020, it has the sixth highest per capita murder rate. New York State, on the other hand, is 34th in murder rates, and New York City is one of the safest major cities. In fact, of the top 10 states with the highest murder rates, 8 are red states. And let me just add that in the last Congress, I passed 4 bills that I'll mention The Invest to Protect Act, which authorized $300 million in grants to local law enforcement agencies with fewer than 125 officers, in other words, small departments. 55 Republicans voted no. The Victim Act, which authorized $100 million in grants to law enforcement agencies to help solve violent crimes and close outstanding cases. 178 Republicans voted no. The assault weapons ban that keeps weapons of war off the streets, nearly every Republican voted no. And the Law Enforcement De-Escalation Training Act, sponsored in the Senate by Senator Cornyn to fund de-escalation training, 159 Republicans in the House voted no.
Thank you, Ranking Member Nadler. And I think when you look at the record, there is a consistent record of Democrats voting for increased funding for law enforcement on a regular basis, at least in the last cycle. And we passed many of those bills out of the floor, and some of them were actually also signed into law because they passed on the Senate. With that, Ranking Member, is there anything else you'd like to add? If not, I yield.
All set, thank you.
Okay, I'll yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. We should just offer the gentleman from Arizona a chance to respond if he wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to point out just two things. I mean, I don't want to relitigate everything, but just two things. Number one is federal funding of police. When you talk to local law enforcement, they are scared to death that with this funding will be the mechanism to federalize local law enforcement. That really is a concern with them. I talk to our local chiefs all the time about a series of issues. And the other one is, my distinguished colleague, the ranking member, was talking repeatedly about red state murder rates. That's a blue city problem in red states. That's what it is. It's blue cities in red states, and that's what causes the problem. I'll yield back. Thank you.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Secretary Cardona, for being here and bringing your perspective that is so unique of having taught in the classroom and taught in the kind of classrooms that we are talking about now. Sadly, yesterday, an 18-year-old used an assault rifle to kill 3 elders and wound 2 officers in Farmington, New Mexico. Every school in the city locked down, including an elementary school that was right near the shootings. Thankfully, none of the victims were children. However, as you know, in the last 10 years, there have been 664 shootings at K-12 schools. 267 people have died. So many more have been traumatized. I believe it is heartbreaking and irresponsible that the majority of Republicans refuse to take action on an assault weapons ban. Secretary Cardona, do you agree that banning assault weapons would decrease the number and severity of school shootings in America?
I do.
So I also believe, thank you very much, and thank you for standing with our children. It is ridiculous that children have to be afraid of going to school, that their parents have to live in fear every time they drop their children off, and that what happened in Farmington, that you are no longer safe just driving down the street of your neighborhood. But moving on to another matter about financial fitness, I think we need to encourage our young Americans, our students, to give them financial fitness, not literacy, because we all know how to read, but financial fitness, make them strong enough to move about in our world. I have the Financial Fitness Act, which would direct the Department of Education to establish a personal finance education portal available to the public, including both the students and their parents, to provide the kind of information about creating that fitness. Would you commit? The bill almost made it through the Senate we were that close, but I think you could establish this kind of online portal now. Would you commit to working with us to do that?
Absolutely. I'd love to hear more about it and hear more about that. I think in our Raise the Bar strategy, we're really thinking about ways to improve programming in our schools and make sure that personal fitness or literacy, financial literacy is something that students are. But is it okay if I can share a little bit about the previous question?
Please do.
You know, I was a school principal. I think sometimes we lose sight of the emotion that happens when you're in a school, even if it's a school that's not impacted directly by the shooting. I was a school principal when the Sandy Hook massacre happened. I was about 40 minutes away, And I remember the impact that that had, not only on myself, the students, the parents, the teachers. We should not have to worry about safety of 6 and 7-year-olds when they're learning how to read. We've become a bit desensitized as a country. There is no one magic answer to this, but we need to come together around student safety. If we cannot come together around student safety, then I struggle to think that we're going to have to continue this fight. Our students deserve to be safe, and as a parent and educator, this is an area that I think we really need to come together on.
I do believe that we should come together. I've had some very encouraging conversations with those in the community. This 18-year-old was supposed to graduate today. He will not. The law enforcement did a heroic job of responding and minimizing the damage. So it is extremely heartbreaking. But going back to things that are less heartbreaking, but more about promise and opportunity, because that's our job, is to create possibility for our students, to remove obstacles. We don't have disadvantaged students. We have students who have aspirations, and we need to help them get there, right?
Yeah.
And so I am introducing the America's College Promise Act, which would provide tuition-free college for students at community colleges, and especially support low-income students who transfer to TCUs, HBCUs, MSIs, Hispanic serving institutions. That's what we have in New Mexico. Almost every single one of our higher education entities is minority serving institutions. Could you please discuss the need for 2 years of free community college, what that would mean to students and their families?
Sure, and I recognize the time is creeping up here, but it's economic mobility for the child, for the student, for their families, for their community, for their state. Education and getting the skills that they need to have higher paying jobs and contribute to the economy is something that we should all want. To me, universal community college is an investment in our local economy and in our nation's economy.
Thank you very much, Secretary. And I do share everyone's concern about McCarthy's Default in America Act and the devastating cuts it would mean to education funding, but I've run out of time, so I yield back, Madam Chairman.
She goes recognized for whatever question she cares to pose to the panel.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for presenting here today on these two issues. I was going to congratulate our colleague, as we all might know, from Colorado. His new baby, Joshua, came this weekend, and his big sister, Natalie, is important. So I'm sure as he's sitting through these things, he is thinking, and we are all thinking about the children, right? Because what we need to always think about is how are the laws that we are passing, and how do we consider the work that we are blessed to be able to do here in D.C., how is that impacting our children? And I think that the two bills we are talking about today very much impact our children, our communities, in two different ways. And I think there is a connection between them because we know that fentanyl is being brought into the United States by despicable Americans who are crossing our ports of entry in vehicles, often in trucks. And I think that we need to be very clear that there is, I don't think, anybody here in Congress who isn't dedicated to eradicate the scourge of fentanyl that has impacted our communities. And then I think we get to, but what are we doing, right? And this is where we might have some disagreement because we're very concerned, as you know, that right now as we're struggling to address all of these various issues, the Republican majority is holding our country hostage to force passage of certain funding cuts, and that those funding cuts, if applied evenly, will have a really big negative impact with regards to fentanyl on our ability to treat addiction. And I think that when we look at this bill, Chairman Griffith, I appreciate the fact that you want to address fentanyl. And I don't have a complaint about the fact that we are addressing fentanyl. What I worry about is that we are not addressing fentanyl in the many areas it needs addressing, especially with regards to treatment especially with regards to the research into what can we do to make sure we better track, better test, so people aren't unwittingly dying from fentanyl when they had no intent of ingesting fentanyl. And we know, we read article after article about that. And I don't think adding those provisions to this bill would make it unwieldy. I think they are very much tied in because, as my colleague, Representative Scanlon noted, you know, we've been doing this for a while. And we realized some time ago that just having an enforcement-only approach does not work, that you need to look at what is it doing in your community. And I guess, Chairman Griffith, I mean, do you agree that treatment of fentanyl, the public health issue, is something that as a country we need to address?
In another bill, absolutely. This is not the bill. We have hearings coming up in the Energy and Commerce Committee related to dealing with treatment, et cetera. But we can move this bill forward, hold those hearings, and we can look at another bill another day. And one of the problems that we have in getting something that's comprehensive is we get tied up, you know, fighting over big things, and we don't get anything. And this bill represents an opportunity for us to get something done for the American people.
So is it correct then, though, that your committee has jurisdiction over these matters? I mean, you can address these issues, and they can be addressed in a bill. It could be addressed in this bill.
It could be addressed in a bill, but not this bill.
Yeah. This bill could have handled them if any of the amendments would have been adopted. Ranking Member Pallone, what are some of the amendments that you think would have been very useful in making this bill not unwieldy, but actually focused on the problems that we are facing in my community and in every single community across our country regarding fentanyl?
Well, I haven't looked at all the amendments that are before you, but you know, I mentioned the Pappas Amendment, which is bipartisan, that adds these provisions that the President's task force had recommended, you know, with terms of an off-ramp, in terms of not having mandatory minimums unless it's a serious offense, in terms of, well, there's a bunch of things that I mentioned. I don't have to repeat them. Also, I think Ms. Scanlon talked about the strips to test drugs for fentanyl availability, and that's the Crockett bill, amendment number 59, that is before you. Look, we in our committee, as you mentioned, we reauthorize and fund the Support Act, which includes treatment programs, so that could obviously be done. Medicaid, you know, I've been trying to do a Medicaid policy for a number of years that includes a lot of the things that you suggest. I mean, the bottom line is, and I know I just feel like I keep repeating myself, right now, these fentanyl analogs are included under Schedule 1 for the next 18 months, right? We're not really doing anything in this bill other than extending that, which we've done, and making it permanent, which we've done many times, right? And there's no reason to believe that this is going to do anything to address not only the treatment, but even increase law enforcement or anything to prevent overdoses. So, you know, I don't want to, I mean, I know Mr. Griffith keeps saying this is a small step, but I would argue that it's like really not much of a step at all, because it doesn't really do anything at all for the next 18 months other than extend the status quo beyond that. The things you're mentioning are ultimately much more important.
Right, and I think that when we have an opportunity to address something, that we should look at it, when those building blocks are in front of us, when they've actually been handed to us, when they say, here is a building block, using that, I think it's a great metaphor for all of us who have children who love to build things, right? That was a great metaphor to use, Chairman, because it is a building block, except for that those building blocks are before us now, and that here in Congress, we don't always have a lot of time. I'm learning time on the floor and time in this committee are some of our most valuable resources. And so when we have amendments which would say, let's encourage education of stakeholders around fentanyl, let's encourage treatment with the substance abuse prevention and treatment block grants that Representative Ballant suggested, Representative Blunt-Rochester's amendments to increase education. These are all things that could be done easily. They're the blocks that we are refusing to pick up and that I think our communities want us to pick up. They want us to do more than just codify the status quo. And I do think that codifying the status quo is important. So I do agree on that, but I do believe that our communities are asking more from us. I wanted to move to the next item, Senate Joint Resolution 11, which in my mind will roll back important progress we've made on environmental issues. Because, you know, when families and kids aren't sick or paying medical bills, right, what they're doing, they're going to school, they're going to work, they're investing in their community, and we know that this bill will have a significant impact on public health. Ranking Member Colon, can you tell us what some of those impacts are?
Well, I mentioned before, and again, I think you're bringing up a very good point, which is that, and Mr. Johnson talks about the cost to the individual who might, who has a truck, and I think we have tried to accommodate that with this rule. But the purpose of the EPA is to address public health, right? Public health and safety. So it's estimated, I may be repeating myself here, but it says that the final standard, this is what the EPA estimates, that the final standard will prevent each year between 860 and 2,900 fewer premature deaths, 6,700 fewer hospital admissions and emergency department visits, 18,000 fewer cases of childhood asthma, 3.1 million fewer cases of asthma symptoms and allergic symptoms, 78,000 fewer lost days at work, and 1.1 million fewer lost school days for children. Now, again, I hate to talk about these things just in monetary terms, but all these things involve money, right? Because the cost of keeping people in the hospital, the cost of going to the doctor, the cost of swimming, all these things add up. That's where the EPA comes up with this figure of $200 billion saved. So even if you take Mr. Johnson, I think he said that would cost an extra, I don't know what you said, 37 or 57 billion, 39, but can't contrast that with the $800 billion cost of all these terrible things that would happen to people if we didn't do this.
And in New Mexico, this is a major issue. We have many children. We have very high rates of cancer. Very high rates of asthma. Chairman Cole, I would seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the January 13, 2023 report about clean truck rules in New Mexico and what they would deliver in terms of $3.3 billion in benefits and avoiding 28,000 illnesses.
Without objection.
Thank you very much. And I think that these are key because our communities want us to keep them healthy, right? And when you have this kind of benefit, it's hard to say no. And with regards to the idea that we are best suited in a hearing that takes, I don't know, we'll spend maybe 30 minutes on this, the CRA objection overrule. 30 minutes is not a lot of time when you are thinking of overruling something that took years and tons of comment, lots of negotiation between the industry and the EPA, looking at small businesses, looking at how do we have protections for small businesses. So to have us in 30 minutes just say, it's all done with, I just do not think that that is the right way to go, that we need to have and look at the expert testimony that has been developed as part of this rule. So with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Leger Fernandez.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you so much for testifying here today. I find we're at such an important moment this week where we are seeing two really clashes of worldview of what we need for America to thrive. The Democrats' view is that we must invest in those things that give the biggest return. And one of the greatest investments we can make is in our children's education. It's in our students' education, whether that education be leading to a degree in nursing or an apprenticeship in welding, installing solar fields. It's like that idea of investing in our students is so key, whereas on the other side, we see an intent to disinvest, to cut funding for education so that they can protect tax cuts for the wealthy, so they can benefit and prioritize the largest corporations. And we need to remember that that is what we are facing this week, a decision on who do you want to invest in, the wealthiest, the corporations, or our own students. And I am so grateful that you are here talking about the importance of investing in our students. Another one of these things that just does not seem to make sense to me is that there's this idea of correlation and causation, that somehow Pell Grants and federal assistance has led to increase in education. Mr. Cavall, until the Democrats increased the Pell Grant over the last 2 years, when was the last time this program saw a substantial increase?
It had been a decade or more.
Yeah, so several decades. During that decade, did cost of education go up?
It did.
So we were not increasing the Pell Grant, one of the key ingredients for working families, for poorer families, for those who have ambitions but have obstacles in those ambitions to realize. We had not increased it at all, but yet higher education went up. Tell me why it is important to increase Pell Grants for the students who need it most.
Well, Pell Grants are one of the most effective tools we have to help more students enroll in college and complete in college. They serve 6 million students a year, and research shows that they're a wise investment, that actually we eventually get the money back in terms of tax revenue. So solely on the basis of taxpayers, it has a positive return.
So this is another example. What do you invest in and how does it benefit our economy? And you just made that link, and that's actually based on research, not this speculation, this Bennett hypothesis. Are there, which I don't think there's actually any convincing evidence that this is real. Is that correct?
I have not seen any evidence that Pell Grants increase tuition.
Right. So it's not enough to just say it over and over again. Actually, when you look at the studies, Pell Grants don't increase in tuition, clearly, but they have such a benefit for our economy. I also want to talk about the way our educators need our help. We all know that there is a teacher shortage. We all know that teachers come out, they go into college, they come out perhaps with more debt, and yet they're doing us and our families and our community such a service by willing to make less money to teach and educate our children. That it should be the most important job in the world. We don't pay enough to our teachers, clearly, right? But I actually believe that we should do more for our teachers, and one way to do is the Loan Forgiveness for Educators Act. And that would help address teachers' shortage education and sustain a more diverse workforce by forgiving 100% of K-12 and early childhood educators' student loans in exchange for 5 years of eligible service. Mr. Cordray, would you support this kind of legislation? Why is it important?
So I believed in public service education for decades. And in terms of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, our attempts to deliver a more effective program, which is what Congress originally did by passing the statute in 2007, have been very important. If there's going to be further look at revamping public service loan forgiveness, we would be glad to work with you on that. And I do think that it has been very important for public servants across the country to see that they can actually get the relief that they were promised, rather than be tangled up in red tape as was happening for years and years.
Right, and this kind of student loan forgiveness that we're talking about for teachers, as well as for the program that was being discussed earlier, it is actually targeting those with incomes largely under $75,000. So once again, we see that we are targeting those with working class incomes, with teachers' incomes, and not the most wealthy. Thank you so much for your questions, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the time.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. I'd like to recognize Dr. Fox.
Thank you so very much, Chairman Cole. And, I think it is really important that we discuss what's really happening here, and we focus on why we're here and how we got here. And I completely disagree with the idea that we're here because we have failed somehow to address a budget, because that is not why we're here. We are here because Republicans have sown chaos, calamity, and confusion ever since they took office in January. We took a week to elect a speaker. And now we're here because Republicans are holding Americans hostage by refusing to pay America's bills. And thank you so much, Ranking Member Boyle, for setting out what that actually means and does to our economy and does to our financial future. And we need to always remember, right? We've said it over and over again. I think it constantly merits saying over and over again. Republicans had no trouble increasing the debt by nearly $8 trillion under Trump. $8 trillion. And they voted 3 times to raise the debt ceiling. Let's contrast that with what happened under Biden in the first 2 years. We expect that first 2 years of his being in office, the deficit will be reduced by $1.4 trillion. Because we need to remember that budgets are not just what do you spend money on. Budgets are also how do you raise revenue. And what we have been looking at is both raising the revenue needed to pay for the things America wants us to have, whether that's manufacturing in the United States. We hear over and over again about the importance of manufacturing in the United States. Well, guess what? Last Congress, we made something happen on that. We passed a bill so we could start manufacturing what we need in America. And then we passed the revenue provisions to make sure that we raise the revenue to pay for that. That is really what we did. Today, though, we have been forced into this precipice of financial ruin because of the Republicans' refusal to raise the debt limit. They tossed the regular process out, as it was pointed out by our Republican witnesses today. They didn't go through the regular process of having hearings, of having a good discussion of what should or should not be included. Hostage, instead. They chose hostages, and hostages are their words, right? Hostage is a word that we've talked about, but it is a word that Republicans have used when they've talked about negotiating around the debt limit. And the problem with paying ransom is that hostage takers tend to keep taking hostages, right? Normally, hostage taking is a criminal act. In this instance, it is an act against the American people. Ranking Member Boyle, your opening testimony in response to Representative Goose highlighted the problem, right? And you took us back and talked about what happened in 2011, and you talked about how Standard & Poor downgraded our credit rating. You were very diplomatic. You didn't actually say who took us to that crisis, who refused to increase the debt ceiling at that time.
Yes, so in 2011, and this may sound familiar, there was a Democrat in the White House, and Republicans had just won control of the House of Representatives. And you can always tell when there's a Democrat in the White House because then Republicans suddenly are concerned about deficit and debt. When there's a Republican in the White House, concerns about the deficit and debt go away. As you pointed out, no single president in a 4-year period added more to the national debt than Donald Trump. $8 trillion in a 4-year period, and Republicans were in control of Congress during half of his presidency. But now, just 5 years later, with a Democrat in the White House and Republicans in control, we're seeing the same exact playbook that we saw in 2011.
And we see this over and over again, where Republicans claim fiscal responsibility, but actually act incredibly irresponsible. Over and over again, Republicans increase the deficit, they increase it. It depends on what they choose, right? And as our ranking member pointed out, are you going to give more money than the military actually wants? Or are you going to invest in our communities and our people? Now, Standard & Poor's, they downgraded our credit rating. Have they raised that credit limit rating?
No, there are 3 credit agencies, Standard & Poor's, which was the one that downgraded us in 2011, never increased our, never reversed their downgrade. And frankly, my concern and the worry right now is that the other two credit agencies will now follow suit, given the events of the last couple months, which obviously look very much like 2011 all over again.
And so this kind of activity both has a negative impact immediately when we're in this moment of crisis and chaos that's been created by the Republicans, but there is this longer-term impact which you've been trying to explain to us. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And so, for many months, a lot of people were asking me, will we default, will we not default? And I attempted to point out exactly what you just said, that there is real damage even in coming close to the deadline, as we saw in 2011, and as I think we're seeing here right now. And that damage is not just limited to that time period, but we end up having to suffer from it for years to come.
So, Representative Thompson, you're nodding your head. Did you want to add something to this?
Well, I concur with what my colleague, the ranking member, said. We do run the risk of seeing our credit rating again dropped, which is going to be more expensive for the American people. There's a lot of discussion today about taxpayer dollars, the American people's dollars. We're going to be paying a lot more of those if we go through another round of credit downrating. One thing that hasn't really been talked about much is the other impact this gamesmanship has. And I'm certain that every one of us in this room who represents a congressional district has seen this over the last couple of months. We have unnecessarily worried veterans.
Mm-hmm.
We have unnecessarily worried seniors. We have unnecessarily worried anyone who is retired or about to retire and whose retirement is somehow attached to the stock market. We've embarrassed ourselves in the eyes of our allies and our adversaries, and this was all unnecessary. We could have done what we've done many times before, and as was pointed out by a number of members on the committee, what we did in the last administration. We could have paid our bills and moved on to negotiate these things that are so important / worrisome to all of us through the regular order of the budget process. The work requirements has been talked about a lot today. We're in the middle of the Farm Bill. That's where you deal with that. We already have work requirements. If you think they need to be amended, the Farm Bill is the place to do that. And that's what we should be doing, and we should quit causing alarm and unnecessary worry to the American people.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. And I think part of the worry was that the Republicans' Default on America Act, that actually did not protect seniors. It did not protect veterans. It did not protect the programs that America relies on, because it would have cut all of that. We saw that H.R. 2811 could have seen 22% cuts to food inspections, which would have cost our agricultural production $89 billion. We both have what you grow in your rural district is very different than what we grow in mine. I've got cattle, you've got wine, right? But it's like that would have been a big hit. It could have meant fewer air traffic controllers, so that those overburdened travelers would have had to wait even longer times. Go over and over again. There were so many things that were not protected in Republicans' 2811. That was their ransom. Their ransom was 2811, which we refer to as the Default on America Act. They added different words. But we asked them if they would protect veterans back then. We brought up amendments, Democrats did, I did, many of these, to say, if you believe that we should protect veterans, let's pass this amendment. Let's allow the amendment to be heard on the House floor. Because my constituents were worried. And I asked our Republican witnesses, what would you say I should explain to my constituents about the fact that there could be drastic cuts in rural development, ranchers and farmers from the Farm Bill getting cut? And what they told me, the witnesses said, was, you should tell them that we have to prioritize. So let's talk about priorities. Republicans voted against every single one of those amendments. They would not let them be heard on the floor that would have protected rural development. They said, no, priority, that's not our priority. It's not rural America. We tried to put out amendments to protect rail safety because we had just had the crash in Palestine, food inspections, nutrition programs, so much more. And over again, Republicans rejected even hearing the amendments on the House floor. But you know who listened? Is veterans listened. We made sure that we went out and explained what their bill would have done to veterans. We made sure we went out and explained what it would have done to senior citizens, to Medicare, to Social Security. We made sure that the American people heard that over and over again. We went to our districts, and in our districts, they were worried. They were very worried, and that message got out. And what I am very glad about is that the White House listened, that those who were in the room negotiating from the Democratic perspective listened. And so the bill we have seen here today is not the drastic default on America bill. It's very different. And it's going to raise the debt limit. It's going to also give everybody peace of mind for at least 2 years. So while the Default on America bill would have slashed funding to the Indian Health Service potentially, H.R. 3746 allows advanced appropriations for the Indian Health Service to make sure that our health clinics can stay open if we don't pass a spending bill on time. And I will continue to work with Chair Cole. I'm very grateful for all the work he's done to make sure we have those advanced appropriations so we can actually make that permanent. The Default on America bill would have overturned clean energy tax credits and health care for veterans. We are not seeing that anymore in this bill. So while Democrats and President Biden have kept us from the worst, but Ranking Member Boyle, is H.R. 3746 the kind of bill that we could have negotiated through the appropriations process, budgeting process, in regular order?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned I think I mentioned in my opening statement that if the X date, in terms of by when the debt ceiling needed to be raised, happened to be sometime next year, I feel very confident that this agreement, this bipartisan agreement that's before us, is probably what it would have looked like come August, September during the normal appropriations process as we worked to meet the midnight September 30th deadline. So this whole exercise in taking the economy hostage that the House majority Republicans have taken us down, in the end was just entirely unnecessary.
Right. Thank you. You know, and as I mentioned earlier, budget isn't just about the money you spend, it's also about the money you raise. Chairman Smith, would a corporate global minimum tax raise revenue for the United States?
A corporate global minimum tax. If you're talking about the corporate global minimum tax that this administration has entered into in Pillar 2 with OECD, that will in fact suck out $120 billion. And this administration made that agreement, which is bizarre to me.
We have seen that there are actually numbers that it would raise it, the same way that a minimum tax for billionaires would raise revenue. Closing tax loopholes that benefit hedge funds and private equity would raise revenue. Republicans have rejected over and over again proposals that would raise money from those who are the wealthiest and the biggest corporations. For some reason, they don't want to invest in working Americans, in families, in our seniors, in our veterans, and instead they're constantly protecting their billionaire buddies. So I just want to touch on one last thing. Chairman Smith, we've heard preliminarily that this bill might what is the estimated impact on deficit reduction from this bill?
I first want to respond. The global minimum tax that you just referred to, it is a fact. That proposal would pull $120 billion out of our country from American workers and give it to 130 other nations. That is what the global minimum tax that this administration has entered into with the folks at OECD.
Well, you haven't answered. What do you think what is the expected deficit savings from this bill?
$2 trillion.
$2 trillion. It was mentioned earlier that the president had sent over a budget. Ranking member, can you tell us what the proposed, proposed budget would have done to the deficit?
I was proud that President Biden announced his official budget in my congressional district in Philadelphia. That included deficit reduction of over $3 trillion.
So let me get this. This bill that we have before us, they suggest it's going to be a $2 trillion deficit reduction. But the president submitted a budget that would have had a $3 trillion deficit. So once again, the Democrats' proposal is more fiscally responsive and invests in what Americans need, growing the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. I think with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for whatever questions he cares to pose to the panel. Gentlelady from New Mexico.
Thank you so very much. So I want to begin, once again, I think so many of us around this table love our gas stoves, right? In New Mexico, you know, we love the gas stoves because we can make our tortillas on them and our delicious red chili and all of the things that both feed our souls and our panzas. But I agree with you, Representative Scanlon, that when I go to buy a new appliance, and we're talking about new appliances, I really do appreciate the fact that they get more efficient and more efficient over time, because it does save money, and that the proposed rule that we're talking about here actually says it might save from $650 million to $1.7 billion for the consumers. I know I am paying less in electricity when I replaced some of my appliances. So the concept is very good. But the other thing that when we take the time, the precious time, to consider these bills, we are also not addressing some of the really important problems that affect America. So Biden doesn't want to ban gas stoves. Congress isn't going to barge into homes and haul away your existing gas stoves. But what Congress could be doing is taking up Social Security forms consistent with the Social Security 2100 Act, which would guarantee the solvency of a program millions of Americans rely on and needs our support. 83% of Americans want us to protect and expand Social Security benefits, but we're not taking that up, even though it's very popular. Why aren't we putting on the House floor the Dream and Promise Act to create an earned path to citizenship for dreamers, which 71% of Americans support? They want us to be doing this work. So instead of doing this really important work, we are taking up sort of something that got blown out of proportion. And I really wish we were spending our time on the issues that majorities, overwhelming majorities of Americans want us to do. And I look forward to, whenever I get around to buying my new gas stove, having it even be more efficient, because nobody's banning gas stoves, and my son is in culinary. He wants to continue using his gas stove, and so I'm going to make sure he gets to keep doing that. Thank you so very much. Well, let me ask Representative Pallone, is there anything, Ranking Member, is there anything else you want to add?
We just have to keep emphasizing that no one is saying that if you have a stove that you have to get rid of it or throw it away. We're talking about, as you say, regulations for efficiency under DOE, which would be 3 years from when the rule is finalized. Right now it's just proposed. And the other one, which is maybe even worse, is the fact that they would get rid of the agency that determines what's hazardous and what's a safety problem for kids and others. The way these bills are written, they wouldn't have the authority to deal with either of these issues in the future, not only with what they don't like now, but even in the future. And that would be a terrible thing. I mean, gas stoves can be dangerous, and there are hazards if they're not handled properly or manufactured properly. And I don't want to take that away from the agency. And I'm not going to substitute my analysis of what's safe or not.
Well, and I think it's really interesting that when we learn more about things, I wasn't maybe as consistent with always turning on that exhaust fan, and when it's nice, opening my doors. And once I learned about these things, it's like, I myself, I'm not replacing my gas stove now, but I can take more action. So knowledge is good. and science and research are good, and we should not say we cannot progress. We should always be curious. We should always be aiming to be better at everything we do. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member.
Thank you. Gentlelady from Minnesota.
I yield back.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairwoman and Ranking Member, for your presentations. I would just, Chairman Cole, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the CRS report, How Climate Change May Affect the U.S. Economy from April 4th, 2022.
Without objection.
And the reason I thought it would be important to do this is that there is important to make sure that the fiduciaries consider all factors. And that this, the rule that I was very impressed, 83% were in favor of this rule, and these were financial services, capitals. These were people whose expertise is in determining what is best for the beneficiaries. So, as I understand it, am I correct, Chairman Scott, that this is just making sure that the fiduciaries are able to consider all the factors that may impact an investment. And we want to make sure they do that, isn't that correct?
If appropriate.
There we go. So it's a if appropriate, it's not mandatory, there is no sort of ideological mandatory anything. It's just make sure you consider what is best for your fiduciaries, because we do need long-term economic benefit coming for these ERISA plans. Thank you very much, Chairman Scott.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for questions.